most of the engineers are familiar with the Alternative Broadcast Inspection Program, or at least have heard of it. It's been around for a good while. I think it's actually got started out in the Missouri, Kansas City area several years ago. And what it actually is, as most of you probably know, it's a great service, first of all, that the State Broadcast Association can offer to their members. And I like to tell the engineers when I go out to do an inspection is it's a little different from the commission coming out, because normally when the commission comes out, they have a nice little notebook or an invoice book that says, "Thank you for your voluntary contribution to the U.S. Treasury." Well, I don't carry an invoice book, so I don't write an invoice out for them like that. But the way that we normally do the inspection is it's rather low key, the way that I do them. It's just like a nice visit with the engineer and walk around and look at his facility and talk about. And after doing it for so many years, I found that I can sort of carry on a conversation with the engineer and be inspecting things as we do. So it makes it sort of not so tense. I have had some people, when I come in, they said, "Man, we've been on pins and needles knowing that you're coming in today." I said, "No, I'm not here to get onto you or slap your wrist or anything like that. I'm actually working for you today, and I'm here to help you find some areas that might need to be addressed. And then if we do, then we'll give you a period of time to correct them, and then after which you will receive a certificate of compliance." Now, the one big feature of it is that once we sign off on the inspection that they have met all the items on the checklist, they receive a certificate, which is good for 3 years. And the FCC has said that during that 3-year period, they will not make a surprise inspection at your station. Now, they can still come by during that 3 years if they receive a complaint on the station or for any kind of safety violation. But once they are notified that a station has complied with the inspection, they don't come knocking on the door and flashing their badge and say, "I'm here to inspect it." We actually send them a list of the stations that we have inspected that have passed. The other great thing about it is that it's completely secure. Nobody really knows about what I see when I go to an inspection. We don't send anything to the FCC. Even the State Broadcast Association doesn't get a report. It's only sent to them, to the general manager and the chief engineer. That is, if I find something that's not exactly right and they need to address it. Typically what happens is once the FCC approves the engineer, the State Broadcast Association has a contract with the FCC to administer the program in their state, and they secure the services of an engineer that has to be approved by the regional office. And we're normally given a checklist from the commission to go by. Now, what we have done in our state and several of the southeastern states, we have created our own checklist built around the FCC checklist, because as you know, there's been a lot of changes in the rule, rapidly changing, and some of the things are no longer in the checklist that the commission has. So we have created our own checklist and added all the extra stuff that we actually have. The first thing that, I'll just go down briefly the list and what we look at. The very first thing that we look at is the public files. Now, obviously back before stations went online, that particular part of the inspection took some time at the station. You had to sit down and go through their file cabinet, which quite often was in sort of a mess. The folders were not in order. And I actually went to a station one day and I said, "I need to look at your public file." And he pulled open a file drawer and there was just a stack of paper in there. I said, "What is all that?" He said, "This is my public file." He had no folders or anything. So it took a good while to go through it. But now that the commission has actually put everybody online, it's so much easier. I actually do the public file part of the inspection before I leave to go to a station. So I can sit down at at the office or my home and go through the file and make any notes that may be addressed. Now, I know if most of you that are on the webinar today are probably engineers and you normally don't do much with the public file. There are a few things in the file that are technical. The rest of it has to do with operational. If you have not gone to the public file, I can actually show you real quickly here, and it's just a pretty neat way they've got it set up to go and look at the file. Oh, it's thundering here. I hope we don't lose power here. This is actually the public file location. You just go to publicfiles.fcc.gov, and then as you see over here on the right, there's actually a place where you can type your call letters in. Let's type one in here, a different one than what I had up there. SBEHM. You just type your call letters in, and then simply go up and click on the search menu. And I lost my arrow. Hang on one second here. And there we go. Come down to here. Just do it down here. It's easier to see. WBHM. And this will actually open up the file to go see the actual file. And you scroll down and see this is sometimes you'll see AM, FM if the station has both AM and FM with the same call letters. But we'll click on here, and here's actually the public file. And it's just like the old file drawer that had all the folders. These are just individual folders, and they've got PDFs in it. The first folder that you see is the general information, which has your license, and it also has your renewal authorization and information about the station itself. This is a non-com I'm looking at. That's why it says Board of Trustees. This particular folder shows the application and any related materials. If you file for an STA or you file for a new license or anything like that, your folders are in there, in that folder. This folder actually has the ownership report, which you can look and see the latest ownership report. The EEO records are actually in this particular folder. Here's one that from a technical standpoint you can look at. This is actually the contour maps. It'll actually show you the current technical contour map. It's not a sales map. I have been to some stations when I asked to see their contour map. It's a sales map. Well, as you probably know, the pencil that salespeople use drawing maps a little bit, they go a little bit past where it should really be, but that's the one that's on here is actually the legitimate one. This folder is political file, which is really a heated thing that's going on right now. If you didn't get a chance or was not part of the webinar yesterday that the NAB had on political files, it's sort of touchy right now. This is some other files, and the most important thing in that area there is the issues and programs list are actually in that file itself. So that's how you get to it. You just go to publicfiles.fcc.gov and type in your call letters, and it will bring it. You can look at any station's public file if you would like to. You can go in and check your actual license. And I suggest engineers, I have seen some engineers, believe it or not, not many, but I've run into some engineers that have never even looked at the license. So I suggest that if you haven't, you make sure that you get a look at the copy of it, and sometimes you can actually print it if you want to and leave a copy out at the transmitter. So that's what the public file looks like, and that's the first thing that we actually go over. If there are areas of concern that need to be addressed, like the issues and programs are political, then we talk to the people in the station that actually handle that type of stuff. As I mentioned, it's good to, if you look at the public file, to download a copy of the license and keep it out at your transmitter. You say, well, since it's available on the web, I can just bring it up on my iPad or my phone. But as you know, some sites have very poor cell service, and you may not be able to see it on an iPad or a phone. one of the things that was in there that I didn't point out a while ago, but when you're looking to where your station authorization is, there's a little place says additional documents. The people that designed this website, the online public file website, did an excellent job. And this is just a spare document that you can put whatever you want to in there that you may need to refer to or to keep up with. Some of the things that can actually go in there that are not actually part of the public file. Of course, if you're an AM, you have to do NRAC measurements every year. You can keep those in there. You can keep your station logs in that additional folder if you like. Your chief operator designation, that every station has to have a designation signed by the general manager of your chief operator. That additional folder is another good place to keep that. Your antenna structure registration, you can keep that in there. These are things that you have to have for an inspector to look at, but it's not necessarily part of the public file. But that additional document folder is a good place to keep them. Other licenses that you may have, STLs, RPUs, translator licenses, that's just a real convenient place to put them. The problem that I see a lot of times, the people that are maintaining the public file put the wrong things in there. I've opened up the additional documents before and seen the EEO stuff actually in the additional documents under the licenses. So if the wrong stuff is in there, you need to get with the people at the station that's maintaining the online public file and of course make sure they move it over to the right folder. The other thing that we look at after we get through looking at the public file at the studio is the EAS system. This is, of course, required by the FCC. And as a broadcast station, you do want to serve the public interest, so you have to maintain all the equipment. You must have the right type of equipment installed, Sage or DASDEC or whatever you may have. Gorman Reglet still has one out, so make sure that you've got the right equipment in there and it is configured correctly and operating correctly. Years ago, I used to do inspections over in South Carolina, and I went into a station and was checking his EAS, and we look at the monitor inputs to make sure that he's got the correct audio that's in his state plan. One of the monitor inputs didn't have any audio on it, and the commission tells us, the inspectors, that we're not allowed, if we do inspections of a station, we're not allowed to do any work with that station for, obviously, that would be a conflict of interest, which I understand that. But while I'm there, if I can sort of help the engineer, if he's got a problem that makes him non-compliant, if I can sort of show him what to do to make it compliant or help him make it compliant, I'll do that, because I think that's a good thing. Well, this particular station had no audio going into one of his monitor inputs. So we walked around back. I said, let's look at the back of he had a Sage unit. I said, let's look at the back of this Sage. Maybe a wire broke off or something. And what we discovered was rather humorous. The radio that he was using to pick up this particular station for one of his monitor points, the board operator had unplugged the wall wart and plugged in his cell phone charger. So obviously that rendered that monitor input with no audio. So we got that corrected. We also look to make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to with EAS, and we'll just quickly walk down through these. Most of you know all of this anyway. You're required to receive a required weekly test from both of your assigned monitor sources. That is, if somebody hadn't unplugged the radio. And you also need to receive the required weekly test, which is issued through the ABIP system. That's the test that comes down on Mondays at 11 o'clock in each time zone. So that's one of the things you're required. ABIP is the Integrated Public and Alert Warning System, and that's actually is not a monitor input on the back of your unit. It actually comes in on the internet. You're also required, as you know, to transmit your own weekly test. And I have a lot of stations ask me about what time and what day they should run those. According to the commission, it has to be run on random days and random times. So you can't run your weekly test every Sunday morning at 4 a.m. It has to be scattered out randomly in different times of the day. If you are running, if you're an FM station that's running HD and you have an HD2, 3 or 4, or if you're a television station and you're running a .2, 3 or 4 or 5, you have to run that weekly test on all the secondary audio and video streams. So make sure that the way that you actually have your unit set up to relay the test, that they're going out on the main channel as well as any other type of secondary audio or video stream. You're also supposed to receive and relay the required monthly test. And this is sent out by someone in your state. In Alabama, it's actually initiated by the Emergency Management Agency. And we have those scheduled at specific dates and times. Those normally will go on 1 month. The odd months, I believe, they're sent out during the day. On the even months, they're actually sent out on the after at night. So they alternate back and forth. And you have to relay those required monthly tests within 60 minutes. That's a window that you have to actually send those out. There used to be, it was sort of a shorter time period, like about 15 minutes, I think. And we at one time had hours set up at like 17 minutes after the hour so that it would fall at a natural break in a television program. But that didn't work very well. So the SBE and I think the NAB got in on it. We actually petitioned the commission to extend that window, and they did. So the window now is 60 minutes. So you have to relay that required monthly test within a 60-minute period. Obviously, you have to receive and relay any national alert that comes in from the Washington. And again, that has to go out on all secondary audio and video streams. You must log all of this information in this station log. Every station must have a station log, and that station log must be reviewed and certified weekly by the station chief operator. Now, I've had questions about who can be the chief operator. It doesn't necessarily have to be the chief engineer or an engineer. It can be the station operator or someone who is familiar with the station operation. But when he or she is reviewing that log, they're making sure that everything is operating, that everything that's in the log that should be actually in the log. I can actually show you, let me see if I can find it here, and I'll show you a station log that we actually came up with for our stations here in Alabama. And if you want to keep it on one sheet, you can keep a whole month's worth of information on one sheet. This top section, you can put the station call letter, the month and the year. The first section actually is where you put the information concerning the required monthly test, who you received it from, the date and time, and when you retransmitted the date and time. Now, most people actually just do automatic relay, so these dates and times will probably be the same. And if you didn't get it or didn't relay it, then you can actually put the information in there. The center section of this log is when you received weekly tests from your monitor sources. We went ahead and put iPause as the third monitor source because you know everybody's got to do that anyway. But you can put the two monitor sources, radio stations or TV stations that you're monitoring. And this gives you a place to actually enter the date and time for the different weeks of the month. The third section of the weekly log, of the station log, is where you can make a notation of the actual weekly test that you transmitted, the week and the date and the time that you actually did it. Then you go on down if you had any failures. We added a place in here where you can actually include the tire lap malfunction, because that's something you have to keep on the station log as well. And then the most important thing is a place where when the chief operator actually reviews the weekly log, where they can sign and date it. Now, this is not required by the FCC. We just came up with it because we thought it would be rather convenient. A lot of people actually print the log off their unit, which is perfectly legal. It just uses up a lot of paper, and you have to go through and make sure that you have checked and make sure you are getting the alerts and the tests that you're supposed to be. We actually had a couple of stations, since this is a PDF file, they can actually store it, and you can actually copy and paste the information over from your EAS unit to that. And the signature, since it's PDF, you can store your signature in there and drop the signature on the page too. So that's just a easy way. If you would like to have a copy of that, at the end of the presentation, I'll give you a site where you can go and actually get that. So that's one of the things that we check really deeply in, is looking at EAS and station log. So the three things that needs to be on the station log, and this is what we look for, is all the information that's required for EAS operations, any information concerning malfunction of the tower lights. Now, this is a little weird situation right here. The FCC rules does not state that you have to make a notation in the station log every time you check the tower lights. You just have to make a notation in the station log when they malfunction. I actually had back before I became an inspector, I had a sort of a humorous encounter with an inspector. I'd known him for a long time, and we got along real well, and he was out at one of my sites, and he was looking at the logs. He said, "I don't see where you made a notation of when you check the tower lights." And I looked at him, and I sort of knew where he was going with that. I said, "Well, you don't have to." He said, "Oh yeah, you do." And I told him, I said, "No, you don't. Read the rules." And he was an FCC inspector, and little short guy, and he looked over his glasses. He said, "Do what?" I said, "Look at the rules. The rule says you have to make a written notation in the station log of any malfunction. It doesn't say that you have to make a written notation of when you check them." He said, "Well, how do you know they malfunction if you don't check them?" I said, "We do. You just don't have to write it down." So, I mean, it's a good idea to put it on a log if you're keeping a log that you did check them, but you just don't have to put that in the station log. The actual, and we'll look at something about the tower lights in a couple of minutes. There is a third item that's supposed to be on the station log, and this has to do with any information concerning transmission system failures or repairs. This has to do with the transmitter, transmitter antenna, transmission line, any adjustment that you make to the metering, calibration, and stuff that way. That actually has to be included on the station log as well. And the chief operator should look at that thing once a week, review it closely, and sign off on it. If it is not the engineer that's doing it, and he sees something that's not right, then he or she should notify the technical department that, look, we've got a problem here, and you need to check in on that. Oh, went through one. You need to make sure that you have a copy of the National Operating Handbook. You can get that off the web from the FCC site. You also need to have a copy of your state plan. And let me bring up the chat room in case anybody's asking a question. Oh, here's a question. What if your stations have sold their towers to Vertical Bridge or American Tower? That's an easy one. They are responsible for that. Both Vertical Bridge, American Tower, or anybody, or even if you just rent space on a tower, then you are no longer responsible for the tower lights. They are responsible for that. I always ask them to let me know. Some of them will and some of them won't, but you don't have to keep anything on the station log if you are actually renting a space on a tower, or if your company like iHeart has sold theirs to Vertical Bridge, and obviously just recently Cumulus announced that they've sold all their towers to vertical bridge. And so they maintain the tower lights. They actually come in, if you haven't seen one of them, they put a little Verizon or wireless device inside the control unit, and that's how they monitor actually your tower lights. So I'll leave the chat window open here in case anybody has any other questions. I'll try to catch them as we go along. That sort of finishes what we do at the studio. We go over the public file and the EAS. That's basically all that's done at the studio now. And then we hop in the engineer's vehicle. I normally ride with the engineers because they know how to get to the site in an easy manner. And some of the sites are in not very good locations, and rather them tear their car up than tear mine up going out to the tower. Let's see, no, that's not a question. When we get to the tower light, there's a lot of the tower site. There's a lot of things this is where a lot of the inspection takes place out there. The first thing we look at is actually the tower itself and make sure that it's painted correctly, correct number of levels. The lighting is correctly. If it's a painted tower and you have to have incandescent lights, as you know, several years ago, the commission changed the rules to where your intermediate flashing lights, you got a beacon on the top and the intermediate lights up and down the tower, they now require 2 at each level instead of 1. They have to be on opposite sides of the tower. This was brought about by the FAA to make sure that a pilot, no matter which way he's coming in, what angle he's coming in, can actually see the light. If you just had 1 lamp like we used to, then it could possibly be blocked by a tower leg or transmission line or something like that. So now they do require. Pay close attention to the banding. You can get these charts off the FAA website. There are a certain number of bands that you're supposed to have based on the lighting. Anything under 199 feet, you do not have to paint it or light it. I did see a tower one time for Little AM that was on 1410, and their tower was like, well, at 1410 it was around 160 something feet, so they were not required to paint the tower, but it was a directional. But somebody had painted all 3 of them, and they looked very nice. I said, well, how nice of him to paint his tower. But then I got to looking at one of them, and there was 11 bands of paint on that tower, alternating bands. I said, oh my word. And I called the engineer that sort of keeps that up. And I said, who in the world painted that tower? He said, the manager did. He thought it would just look cool. I said, yeah, but you got 11 bands, so a pilot would think that's a 1,100 foot tower. So make sure that you actually paint it the right number of levels. Even if it's under the 199 foot rule, if you decide to paint your tower, the FAA told me that you can paint it green or purple or black or blue or whatever you want to do. They don't care. But if you paint it with aviation orange and white, it does have to comply to the banding standards. Somebody asked about beacons. 2 needed only if you get a new determination. No, the determination on your license just says what type of lighting you should have. Refers to a strobe lit tower or a incandescent tower or medium strobe or high intensity strobe. So the thing to put 2 lamps was actually a rule that came down through the FAA to the FCC, where they actually had to do that. If you have if you have strobe lights, the same situation occurs as far as the number of lights, but obviously there's no banding requirements there because you typically don't paint a strobe lit tower. So we look at those to make sure that the painting is correct. We actually have I carry with me a chip chart that the FCC requires that I carry one. And this actually checks the reflectivity of the paint on the tower, and I can see if the tower is actually meeting the specifications for the correct color and the reflectivity of the paint. Sometimes you run into a tower that you don't really have to use a chip chart. Obviously, when this one is in sort of bad shape, not only with the paint, but look up at the top. I think he has a tension problem on his guy wire that needs to be straightened out. So that one I just left the chip chart in the car. I didn't even need to bring that one out. Here's something that sort of would probably catch you off guard, but you need to make sure, look at your license and see what the license says about the number of bays if you're an FM station. If it's a 4-bay or here's one that has 6 bays. I have seen a couple of stations, not many, but I've seen a couple in my years of inspecting that had the wrong antenna on the tower. I recall one that had on the license, it said 4-bay. And when I got there, it had a 6-bay like this one. And I asked the engineer, I said, have you changed your tower, your antenna lately? He said, no. And then he said, no, wait. He said, about 4 years ago, we burnt the antenna up and we got a better deal on this 6-bay antenna, so we put it up there. I said, did you modify your TPO of the transmitter with the commission? No, were we supposed to? I said, well, yeah. And he said, does that make a difference? I said, well, yeah, your ERP now is way over. So if you change antennas, make sure that you recalculate the TPO and send that to the commission. So just as a sidelight, look at your license, make sure the number of bays that you have up there match what you actually is actually on the license. Other inspection items that we look at is we make sure that you have listed somewhere, typically in your maintenance log, results of the quarterly tower light inspection. Regardless of how you're actually checking your tower lights, you must check that system once every 3 months. Now, according to the rules, you can check your tower lights one of 2 ways. You can do it manually by either visually looking at the tower, if you can see the tower at night, or with some sort of remote control that gives you an indication that the tower lights are functioning correctly. Or alternatively, if you install an automatic system that automatically monitors tower lights 24 hours a day, and it will send you a text or an email or something to that effect, or an alarm to the master control that there's a failure, then if you have that automatic system in, then you're released from checking the tower lights every 24 hours. You have to check them once every 24 hours, either visually or manually, unless you have a automatic system which will notify you, then you don't have to do anything every 24 hours. The automatic system is very good, because if you are checking them either visually or with some sort of a remote control, and you check the tower lights at 8 o'clock at night and they're okay, and at 11 o'clock at night they go off, you won't know about it again until 8 o'clock the next day, 8 p.m. the next night. But if you have an automatic system and your lights go out at 2 a.m. in the morning, you're going to get a text or a phone call or something like that. So the automatic system is a much better way to go. Plus, it relieves you from having to make sure that you check it every 24 hours. Equipment performance measurement is something else we look at. Now, typically, this is not a big deal in FM. Well, let's start with AM. AM it is, because in AM you have to make an equipment performance measurement, which is known as the NRSC. You have to do that every year, not to exceed 14 months, I believe it is. And that's where you bring somebody in, unless you have a spectrum analyzer to do it yourself. and check to make sure you're fitting within the NRSC mast. So I make sure that all the AM stations have that. Now you have to keep those for a period of 2 years. So you should have 2 years worth of those in your file. Here again, it can actually be placed in that other document folder on the online site if you like. FM stations typically don't, they do those, and you have to do an equipment performance measurement if you make any changes that would affect the transmitted signal. For instance, if you put in a new transmitter, a new stereo exciter, a transmission line or antenna, any of that type stuff that would affect the actual RF signal that's being radiated, then you do have to do a performance measurement. This is simply making sure that your harmonics are within or in tolerance, and these have to be kept in the file for 2 years. Television stations are actually a little easier, which we'll show you in a minute. It's actually done. You don't really now that we've gone through repack, most all the TV stations have had an equipment performance measurement, because the people that put in new antennas, a new transmission line, normally swept the line, swept the system, and generate that. So they have that put up. So FM and TV will do it initially when equipment is changed and keep it for 2 years. AM stations have to do it once each year. A schedule of maintenance. Now, the commission does not actually list by name a maintenance log. So you can't find that anywhere in the FCC rules. But there is a rule that says you must have a schedule of maintenance for your station. And I once asked the chief of the Atlanta regional office about, I said, what does that actually mean? Nobody that I know, no engineer that I know actually schedules when they're going to do maintenance. He said, well, that's something that will show an inspector that you are actually visiting the transmitter and doing any kind of maintenance or adjustments. He said, what we look for when we go around to the station is a properly kept maintenance log. And this goes a long way. And I encourage all engineers to have a maintenance log. It's not a big deal. There's no particular form. We always used at the stations that I worked at just a spiral notebook that we bought for 25 cents at Walmart. And every time you visit the transmitter, you can just make a notation that you're there, and anything that you observe, anything that you did corrections, like change the air filters in the air condition, or the transmitter, or the light was out over the door, or whatever. Just make a notation every time you go out there. And anytime you did any major work in the transmitter, you can make notations of what you did in the maintenance log. It does two things. It helps you keep up with what you've done in the past. When you get old, like I am, sometimes, and you go out to the transmitter with a problem, and you say, well, you know, I had this problem 5 or 6 years ago. What did I do to fix it? And you can go back in the old maintenance logs and say, there's what it is. It was that stupid capacitor up in the cavity that you can't reach hardly without breaking your arm. But that's what the problem was. So it's good to do that and keep that maintenance log in hand, because I assure you, if I come in, I'm going to want to see it. And if the FCC comes in, they want to see it. And if you have a maintenance log, that shows the commission and shows an alternative inspector that you are visiting the transmitter. Because there's a funny little line in the rule. I don't know if you've seen it or not. It says you need to check these items as often as necessary to ensure compliance. I've had engineers say, what does that mean? I said, well, to be honest with you, it means you don't ever have to go to your transmitter if you don't want to. But woe be unto you should the commission come in and go to your transmitter and find that you are out of tolerance. The first question is, when was the last time you checked this? That maintenance log will cover you on that. Make sure you got your RF hazard signs on fences surrounding the tower and the building. Some other items. Oh, here's a good one here. If you, especially on an FM tower, if you have transmission lines on the outside of the leg of the tower, on a painted tower, you actually have to paint those cables as well. That's an FCC requirement via the FCC. If you have 4-inch line or 3-inch line running up a leg, then supposedly that will actually be a deterrent for a pilot from seeing the red side of your tower. So they ask that you actually paint the coax on the tower. You need to keep, for FM, you need to keep a record of the efficiency of that transmitter, because normally when you check the transmitter power output, you got to know what the efficiency is of that transmitter. One inspector came in and wanted to know where my efficiency factor was. I said, it's in the maintenance log on the inside cover. He said, it needs to be posted on your transmitter. I said, no, I don't ride on my I want to keep my transmitter pretty and clean. I don't ride on it. I don't put stickers on it. I put the efficiency factor on the front page, the inside cover of my maintenance log. So it's sitting right there, but you really need to have that. Obviously, antenna registration signs need to be up. I look for those to make sure that they are either mounted on the tower or the fence going around the tower. One thing to keep in mind, if your tower, like a lot of towers, may be out in the middle of a cow pasture somewhere, and you have to go in through a fence on the road to get to the tower, you also have to put that antenna structure registration sign out on that fence that you go through as well. Reason being, the commission says they're not going to break and enter to see whose tower that is. So you actually have to put it out on the access road to get in there. Also make sure you know that your tower is in the right location. You can check that with a handheld GPS. I carry one with me, and typically when I go to a station that I've never been before, when we get to the tower, I turn it on and sit it on the pedestal of the concrete pedestal of the tower and let it sit there while we're looking at other things, because typically it takes a few minutes for the GPS to log on to all the satellites, and it will give you the coordinates. So that way we make sure that the tower is where it's supposed to be. I did go to a TV tower one time, and when I was driving down the road to the tower, I had a GPS in the car, and it actually showed the tower was supposed to be on the right side of the road, and the tower was on the left-hand side of the road. So when I pulled up, I sat my GPS out and checked it, and it was actually on the wrong side of the road. And I mentioned this to the engineer, and he said, yeah, we know that. Said it was a typographical error. We submitted it to the commission, and they just haven't got around to changing it yet. So he said, I'll assure you that we filed it. And so I checked it, and they had filed it with the commission. They just had not updated it. So you need to make sure that your tower is where it's supposed to be. This is just a picture of one of the RF signs. There are several different types, a yellow and a green and a red. The red actually says, don't go in this gate. The RF is too strong in there for humans to be in there. So make sure that you have those mounted on the fence around the tower. This is a typical antenna structure registration tower. It doesn't have to be this fancy. This is a commercially made one. You can just put the numbers. And I normally encourage stations just to put the number, and don't make one fancy with your call letters and your logo on it. College kids or school kids think they look cool in their dorm room, and they'll steal them and put them in their dorm room. So don't put your logos on the sign. Just put the number. The commission and people that really know what they need to know can look at it and say, oh, I know what that is. That's the structure registration. When we're looking at power measurements, we do this. We check the power to make sure that you're operating correctly. On AM, it's a little more difficult. You have to go down to the tower site, open up the door to the antenna tuning unit normally, and look at the RF meter and read the current that's plugged into the hopefully plugged into the ATU. And this is one that you can actually where you can plug the meter in. If you have one that's permanently mounted in there, quite often it will get hit by lightning and go away. So this one has a dual J plug where you can plug the meter in and then pull the shorting one out. Now, personally, I never do that. If the engineer that's with me wants to do it, he's welcome to do it. I'd rather shut the transmitter down and plug it in because you're not very far away from the feed in there, so that's not a good idea. Some units will have the this type unit here with the coil that the transmission line feeds through. That makes it a lot easier to read it out in a digital mode. Of course, then you use the Ohm's law, I square times R. The R is actually on your station license, or should be on your station license. That way you can calculate to see if he's running the right power. There's our Ohm's law chart. You need to have a copy of that so you can remember it. This one, I didn't really have to read it. I think lightning had come in and it was actually pointing below zero. So you would think he was off the air with that type of reading, but he just got hit. If you're directional, you will normally have a common point meter that's looking, the resistance normally would be 50 ohms. And there you're reading the common point current going into the transmitter. Now you're actually allowed to run a little bit extra power because of the loss in the phaser itself, and that's actually on your license as well. You also are supposed to have an antenna monitor for directionals, and I checked that, checked the readings on it. This is actually a 3-tower array. Here's one that has 12 towers, believe it or not. This station was really eager to have a radio station with 12 towers. The new ones are digital, makes it easier to read. When you're checking these things, remember that the current ratios between the towers have to be maintained with plus or minus 5%, and the phase ratio between the towers have to be between 3 degrees, plus or minus 3 degrees. If you're directional, yes, we do go out in the field and check the monitor points, and we make sure that they're correct. One side note, I know we're getting close to time here, but one side note I'll tell you, make sure if you are a directional, the rules no longer require that you go out every month and read those monitor points. But let me assure you that you really need to know at least where they are. It's embarrassing to tell the engineer we need to go out to the monitor point and read the signal level, and you go out to where the monitor point is and there's a super Walmart built there. Or what's even more embarrassing, they don't know where it is. So you need to do that. I personally tell engineers, and this is the way I used to do it, even though you're not required to, at least once a quarter, and go out to the monitor points and make sure they're working. For two things: you make sure they haven't built a Walmart on your monitor point, and that it's still accessible and not in the middle of a interstate. But the other thing is those meters that you're reading the phase and the current ratio on it, they're looking at the system there at the base of the tower, not out in the field. So this will actually show you what's going on out in the field. You could have somebody build a big metal barn, or a cell company put a tower up that didn't notify you and affect your pattern. It will not be reflected back on the antenna monitor at your transmitter, so it's good to continue to do that. I always ask engineers, how do you know when the mode changes takes place? The commission gets rather antsy when you operate with daytime parameters at night. So you need to have a way to know. Your remote control should notify you that it did or it didn't change to the directional mode or lower power or whatever the mode change happens to be at night. So you need to have a way to do that. The fences, obviously that's a no-brainer. You got to have a fence around an AM tower. This particular chart shows you in meters based on the power of the station, how far the fence needs to be from the tower. This particular fence here obviously did not meet specifications. They did have a fence, but obviously somebody could crawl through the fence, and they touch the tower, depending on the power, that would be rather bad news. This is not an approved fence. I actually saw this at a station, but I did an inspection on. That's not a very good fence. You can just sort of push it over and get onto the tower. So make sure it is a good tower. The gates need to be locked. In this particular case, the engineer said, yeah, it is locked. Well, yeah, the lock's locked, but the hasp broke half in two. So those are things you want to inspect to make sure that they are correct. FM power measurements are a little bit easier. You can use a through-line watt meter only if you have a calibrated dummy load that you can make sure that that meter is reading correctly. The commission would rather you use the indirect method. Again, we can use the Ohm's law by multiplying the voltage times the current times the efficiency that we talked about a while ago, and that will give you the power output of the transmitter. Multiply the voltage times the current and the efficiency, and this is the way the inspector normally does it. If you're running HD, this is not really part of the inspection, but I always take a look at it if he has a way to look at it, just to see that the digital sidebands look like they're doing what they're supposed to do. TV power measurements is the easiest of all. They normally use a power meter. This is one that most stations have, an Agilent power meter that they plug into a port on their mass filter. A reminder to TV stations that you have to measure this at the output of the mass filter, not the input of the mass filter. The commission knows there are some losses in that mass filter, so you actually measure your power as it hits the transmission line going up the tower. So that way your transmitter will be running a little bit more power than the licensed power, but this is where you read it. This unit has to be calibrated periodically. I think they say normally once a year it has to be calibrated to make sure that it is accurate. Other items that we look at real quick, like as we end up here, check the maintenance log at the transmitter, make sure that they're making notations in there, means and procedures to maintain the correct modulation level. That's not a big deal now with all the processors, and the commission doesn't say you have to have a modulation monitor, but somehow or another you need to make sure that you're not over-modulating. Same thing goes for frequency. All modern transmitters now use phase lock loops, and if it gets out of tolerance, the transmitter is going to shut down anyway. But it's good to have a way to make sure that you're exactly on frequency, because even though they don't require you to have a frequency monitor, they don't require you to have a modulation monitor, they require you to be on frequency and not going over modulation. So that's what we normally do. Once we go through the inspection, if everything is okay, we will issue the station a certificate of compliance, as I said earlier, which is good for 3 years. If there are some issues, and most of the issues that I find, to be honest with you, are not things that people do on purpose. It's things that they didn't know was acting that way, or they didn't know it was supposed to be done that way. So people don't do it just to be ugly. So if there are things that I find that need to be addressed, like tower fences, or maybe the power's wrong or something, we write up a report. It's confidential. It stays with the engineer and the general manager, and then we typically give them about a 2-month period to correct those and give me notification and proper documentation that it's been corrected, and then we'll sign off on it and submit that to the commission. And that way they'll have it on their list, and they won't come by and inspect you. I did have an inspector, good friend of mine, that actually called me one day, and he said, I would like to apologize to you. I said, for what? He said, I was actually in a city and was driving around, and I saw the station, and I thought I'd stop and just go in and inspect there, just take a look around. And I walked in and introduced myself to the receptionist that I was from the FCC, and I would like to inspect their station. Very calmly, she pointed up on the wall and said, we just went through an alternative inspection here just a few months ago. Oh, and he said, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't check my database. So have a nice day. And he left, and he called me when he left, and he said, I just want to let you know that I didn't look at my database in case that station calls complaining that I came in. So I didn't mean to do it. And I said, okay, I'll forgive you this time. So any questions that you may have, just you can either open up your mic and ask them or put it in the chat room. If not, well, I appreciate the time. And if I can ever be of assistance, there's my email right there. Just drop me a note, and I'll be glad to help you any way that I can. Thank you, Jeff.
Larry, I've got a few questions.
Okay.
First off, on the quarterly tower light inspections,
Right.
you know, I do a full tower inspection. In fact, I downloaded the forms, I think, from the FCC, where they give you a checklist of everything to look for on the tower itself, not just the tower lights. Shouldn't it be a full-blown tower inspection every 3 months?
No, just a quarterly tower light system. Typically, a tower inspection is done annually, but the tower light system itself, which includes the lights and the control system, like the photocell, you can cover up the photocell with a pad or something to see if it comes on. Some systems actually have you can initiate a fault to make sure that it comes on, but you don't need to do the entire tower.
Oh, okay. Well, I've been doing quarterly tower inspections, the whole thing, so I guess they'll have more on the log than just tower lights. Another question that came to mind as you were talking in regards to coordinates of the tower. If a station's leasing space on somebody else's tower, and you find out later on that the coordinates are actually incorrect, whose responsibility? Who does that fall on? Does that fall on the station that's leasing the space on the tower initially, or is it because here's what we found out: a tower that we're on is a TV tower, and the TV station found out the tower, their coordinates were incorrect. So we're kind of thinking, well, maybe ours must be also incorrect.
Yeah, you need to check your license to see what the coordinates say, and if they're the same as a TV station, then obviously it's whoever drew it up, you know, just went by what the TV station had. But the ultimate, just like the maintaining the tower lights, it's the tower owner's responsibility. Okay. But since your antenna is on that tower, it could fall back on you as well. So you need to make sure you get with the TV station or the owner of the tower to make sure everything. And if it's wrong on your license, you need to send a notice to the commission to get that corrected.
Okay.